everyone, and welcome to Jane Austen on Point, historical analysis of dances from Jane Austen adaptations. I'm Cassidy Mobley, and this is part one of my multi-part series on Pride and Prejudice. Today, we'll be covering what's perhaps the most famous adaptation, the 1995 BBC miniseries. Alright, standard disclaimer that I'm not here to ruin your favorite adaptation by pointing out the historical inaccuracies in the dancing. And I'm not here to judge the artistic merit of these dance scenes. I'm just here to answer the question, how historically accurate are they based on our current knowledge of dancing in Jane Austen's lifetime? As always, I'll start with my general impression of the adaptation apart from the dancing, share one piece of general snark, and then review the dances themselves. I'm really partial to this one because it was the first Jane Austen adaptation I ever saw, right after I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time. I loved almost everything about it, and I still do. It's my favorite by a long shot. I love that a huge portion of Austen's original plot and dialogue are preserved. I think the costumes and locations look wonderful, especially in the recent Blu-ray, which I just bought. And I love all the actors in their parts, especially Colin Firth and Jennifer Ehle, but really I love them all, every single one of them. If I'm being honest, the pacing does have a tendency to drag at times, and I think it would have been better if it had been condensed into 5 episodes instead of 6. Episode 5 in particular really drags out the elopement forever with scenes that work fine in the book but don't really do anything to move the plot along in a theatrical piece. As much as I love Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy, I'm kind of neutral about Wet Shirt Darcy. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. So, my snark about this version is Mr. Collins traveling all the way to Longbourn to console the Bennets about Lydia. That's a whole day's journey by carriage, and then he only stays 5 minutes and then goes home. It makes no sense. In the book, Mr. Collins writes a letter, and I understand that letters are not very cinematic, but they dramatize people reading letters at other points in this miniseries, so I don't get why they couldn't just do the same thing here. Now, on to the dances. This is the adaptation that made me fall in love with English country dancing, and there's a good reason for that. It has 12 different dances in it. 12! That's a little more than a typical evening of modern English country dancing today, and no other adaptation comes even close to that number. I also give them tons of credit for filming these dances in a way that really shows off the choreography. Whenever the camera focuses on the dances, you really get to see the dance and get a sense of its flow and narrative. It's no surprise that there was a huge interest in English country dancing when this series first came out. It's definitely, as I said, what inspired me to give it a try. Interestingly enough, most of the dances in this miniseries are modern reconstructions of late 18th century dances from one book, the Apted Book of Country Dances, which was published in 1931. Although the sources used from that collection are all from Jane Austen's lifetime and therefore plausible for film adaptation, our knowledge of dancing from that era has vastly improved in the last 80 years, and the book itself was more of a reinterpretation of 18th century dances for a modern audience than it was a treatise on historical dancing. The miniseries does fix some of the details that the Apted book got wrong, but they keep a lot of the others, and this gives some of the dances more of a feeling of a modern English country dance than a historical reenactment. I am cutting them a little bit of slack, however, because our knowledge of Regency dancing has improved a lot even since 1995. By the way, I just want to reiterate that when I'm referring to Regency dancing, I'm referring not to the narrow window of time between 1811 and 1820 when Prince George was regent, but the broader and widely used sense of the word Regency, which covers a period of time from about 1790 to 1825. It's useful to think of this period of time as an era because it represents a distinct cohesive movement in clothing and architecture and literature, European politics, and people who use the word Regency in the broader sense are well aware of the fact that the usage is beyond the scope of the time that George was regent. But it's a well-established convention, especially in the dance community, and I don't see any need to alter it as long as we're all clear about what I'm referring to. And yes, I'm aware of the fact that dancing has certainly changed from 1790 to 1825, but I'm still going to refer to it all as Regency dance because, like I said, it's already a well-established term. Anyway, let's look at these dances. there are 6 dances we see at the Meryton Ball. And in general, I will give the scene a lot of credit because all its tunes and choreographies are actually from Jane Austen's lifetime, and they make the dances look like a lot of fun. They do sometimes walk the figures, but the majority of the time they use footwork, which is a big win. The overall grade for this adaptation would be much higher if I were just judging from this scene, or even just from this episode. The first dance uses a tune called The Touchstone from 1780, and uses the original choreography published with it. This looks really good. The figures are good, the footwork is good, it's a triple minor, and the tempo is lively enough without being insanely fast. I like it. I mean, it's still a simultaneous start, but this is about as good as you're gonna get from a screen adaptation. The same goes for the second dance, which is called Trip to Highgate from 1777. We don't see much of it, but what's there is mostly good for the same reasons, though I did catch them walking for the lead down. The third dance I have to be less kind to. It's being done as a duple minor, which isn't period. They're walking the figures, and the music is not synced to the dancing. The choreography was originally published to go with the tune Mutual Love, and they've paired it with a tune called The Flight. This is how it was reconstructed in the adapted book, and they most likely just went with that. Sigh. The same goes for the next dance, tune and choreography both originally from The Comical Fellow from 1776. Again, it's a duple minor, and again there's walking, but at least the setting step looks good, and the circle uses a slipping step. There seems to be a pattern in this miniseries that there's less footwork and easier choreographies when the lead characters are dancing. I wonder if that's because they didn't want to take the time to teach them to be really proficient in English country dancing. Not that I can blame them because they might have had budget or time constraints that made that impossible. Then again, I think that casting for a Jane Austen adaptation should be like casting for a dance-heavy Broadway musical. In other words, non-dancers need not apply. Ah well, that's just me. The fifth dance, which we barely get to see, uses the choreography originally published with The Happy Captive and the tune Dusky Night. It's walked, which makes me sad. I think they probably did this to signify that Miss Bingley is a snob, but a snobbish dancer in the Regency would have been showing off their fancy footwork, not walking the figures. Walking the figures would show a lack of refinement. Anyway, the very last part of this scene uses original music, and it's a montage of The Happy Captive and another livelier dance that generally looks better because it has footwork. But in all, I still have to give them a lot of credit for having dance tunes and figures that would have been plausible for Jane Austen's lifetime, even if they sometimes use styling that wasn't great. It's still more than I can say for other adaptations. The same goes for the scene at Sir William Lucas's house. The dance here is the choreography for Pleasures of the Town to the tune Fair Maid of the Inn. It's got good footwork, and all the figures are period. So I'm happy. Episode 1 gets 4 dance slippers. If not for the couple of duple minors and the walking, it might have gotten 4.5. Remember, I don't give perfect scores in this series. Episode 2 and 3 is where things fall down.
Why? Because I've not had a dance these 3 months together.
In the first dance scene, Lydia asks Mary to play the Barley Mow, but that's not the tune Mary plays. The choreography she does with Wickham to that tune is what was originally published to go with the Barley Mow, but the tune is called Linen Hall. The reason they made this mistake is because the dance was reconstructed that way for the adapted book under the title The Barley Mow, even though they didn't use that tune. I guess this means nobody double-checked what the tune name was before they wrote that line into the script, and that's a failure. Also, the one figure we do get to see is walked. Ugh. Alright, on to the Netherfield Ball. There's been a lot of ink spilled about this one, so I'm going to be brief. The dance Elizabeth does with Mr. Collins is called Shrewsbury Lasses. It's from 1765 and was still popular enough to be republished until 1780, so it's the right era, and it's a triple minor, so points for correct formation. But my problem with this dance is that it's being played way too slow and they walk almost all the figures, so the styling is really bad. Also, the reconstruction, that uses that honor is bogus. The original directions just say set, and Regency choreography doesn't have honors in the middle of the dance, as far as I know anyway. So, good dance, but bad styling. And then there's Mr. Beveridge's Maggot. I already covered why this dance is wrong in my 5 things that Jane Austen adaptations always get wrong about the dancing video. But to summarize very briefly, the style of the music and the figures are both over 100 years out of date. Now, although there were a few dances from that era still being done in the Regency, this was not one of them. Slow Baroque tunes like this were not popular for dancing anymore, and fashionable London gentlemen like Bingley and Darcy would want all the latest dances for a private event. Also, they did the dance as a duple minor instead of a triple minor, so that's not ideal either. In addition, it's a problem throughout this series that the music isn't synced well with the dancing, so they're often dancing off phrase or on the totally wrong part of the song. It's not something that non-dancers would necessarily notice or people who weren't familiar with English country dancing, but for those of us who do know what's going on, it's kind of glaring. Alright, so I want to talk about a few reasons why filmmakers keep using those anachronistic slow Baroque dances for the Lizzie Darcy dance. The first is because they don't understand how much inactivity was built into the format of Regency English country dance, and that all the conversation took place while you were inactive. This was due to using a courtesy start, which meant that most of the couples would have been inactive for several rounds to start the dance, and also because all the dances were done as triple minors, even if the choreography only called for 2 couples, the couples making their way up the set would have been inactive or barely active every other round of the dance, creating even more time for conversation. But since the filmmakers either don't know this or choose to ignore it, they use a slow dance for Lizzie and Darcy so that they can have their long conversation without getting breathless. The reason they use a slow Baroque dance instead of a slower period dance like a waltz or a strathspey is because Baroque music is cinematic shorthand for snobby, and Darcy is supposed to be a snob. I still think a waltz or a strathspey would have worked just as well, though. The tempo would have still been moderate, and you could have created a sense of snobbery through the fancy footwork and figures. There's no need for these anachronistic tunes and dances, and it drives me crazy, especially when the rest of the dances here are approximately the right time period. The next dance we see is at the Christmas party, and it's even worse than Mr. Beveridge's Maggot. It's called Grimstock, and it's from 1651, making it half a century older than Mr. Beveridge's Maggot, and over 150 years too early for the Regency. It's so old that it had fallen out of fashion by the time Mr. Beveridge's Maggot was written. I talked in part 1 of my Emma video about the oldest style of English country dancing having up a double, a back, siding, and arming for verses, and Grimstock is exactly that style of dance. It's got those anachronistic figures, plus turn singles, and they walk the figures. It's a lovely dance, but it's totally wrong for Jane Austen in every way. Mary, play Grimstock. But that dance hasn't been in print for over 100 years. I doubt I could even find it at an extensive library like Mr. Darcy's at Pemberley. Mamma, tell her it isn't fair. Oh, play a jig, Mary. No one wants your historically accurate dancing here. The final dance we see is the published choreography for Lasses of Portsmouth from 1774 to the tune Fête Champre from 1776. The only problem is that it's walked. Blah. Then again, if that's the only thing I'm nitpicking, it's still doing fairly well. Alright, let's give the dances for episodes 2 and 3 a score. To start with, 3 of the dances are period correct for both tune and figures, which is no mean feat, but the other 2 dances are blatant anachronisms, and there's almost no footwork for any of these dances. Therefore, I'm going to give these episodes 3 out of 5 dance slippers. And when you average that with a score of 4 dance slippers from the first episode, this adaptation's total score is 3.5 dance slippers. Quite decent, actually. So, that's my review of the dancing in the 1995 BBC Pride and Prejudice. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more content. And if you're interested in neurodivergent readings of classic literature, check out my series on that. Thank you, and have an ostentatiously good day.